Hi, welcome to, this is Geoff Epstein. Welcome to episode 2 of What's Ahead for Framingham. This show today is going to be a bit different from the prior one in the sense that it's going to be based on a number of articles I've written which address a number of critical questions in this election. One is how each campaign raises money to fund its effort, and the other is what the true state of the schools is. Money matters a lot in the election, and I'm aiming for raising about $30,000, which would pay for about 2 mailers. A mailer such as the Mayor's been flooding us with mailers. There are these 3 mailers we've got in the last month. 1, 2, 3. This really big one and then 2 other smaller ones. These cost about $10,000 each because you're sending them out to all the voters who vote in Framingham. And there's about 15,000 are expected to vote in this next election because that's typical for mayoral elections. And that's about 10,000 households, and so, you know, it costs bulk mailing rate plus the cost of printing is about $1 for every one of these, so 10,000. So I've got 30,000 because we're going to do a couple of mailers. The mayor has $70,000, most of it raised from developers. And so he's going to flood everyone with mailers. He's already sent 3 out. So I want to first talk about fundraising. And I have 2 articles. There's a Substack newsletter that I put out and have for 2.5 years. And the 2 latest articles are first, real estate developer money floods into Framingham Mayor Szycki's campaign war chest. That published about a week ago. And the latest one is about the schools, where Mayor creates an alternate reality for the state of the Framingham public schools. There's an information war going on here where the mayor is saying everything is just great and he's running on developers' funding, and I'm saying everything is not great, but it's actually fixable. But in order to solve the problem of the schools, because they truly are at a tipping point, you have to recognize that there's a problem. How can you ever solve anything if you don't know what the problem is? The mayor thinks there's no problem, so it's quite clear that the trajectory of the city is going to head in the same direction as it has for the last 4 years because he thinks he's doing a great job and there's no problems. However, there are problems, and it's not a bad thing to say there are problems because, after all, most of life is about solving problems. You know, how you're going to pay the mortgage, how you're going to look after your kids and make sure they come out okay and they do well at school. We're solving problems all the time, and therefore we should talk about them, and if you don't talk about them, you can't solve them. It's quite obvious, but there's a lack of discourse on the mayor's side in this campaign, where he's trying to say, well, we've got, you know, a great farmers market, and we've got music going on, and we're going to give free ice cream down in District 8 to people, and just it's kind of like a bread and circus approach to elections where, you know, he's trying to divert your attention from the basics. In fact, the mayor spends very little time in general talking about education or infrastructure or zoning and planning or environment. He likes to talk about the projects that he's done. So I want to first talk about funding because that's really important. The mayor has about $70,000 to $80,000 raised. I'm aiming for $30,000 so I can send out 2 of those mailers. And what happens is that, you know, a normal campaign should cost about $30,000. A couple of mailers out to people. The mayor's got $70,000, so he's probably going to send another 3 or 4 mailers out to people, trying to drown them in the same information again and again. So the question is, where does your money come from? All of my money comes from local Framingham residents, and also my family. You know, my 2 sons, you know, donated, and a couple of friends in Newton, but largely speaking, the lion's share of my funding comes from Framingham. And at this point, I've raised about $20,000, and we're going quite well, and we will make the $30,000 target, all with local money. And I reject any developer money because developers have been so influential in everything that's happened in the last 4 years in relation to the mayor, and certainly city council members are connected to the real estate industry. So we've got to be very careful about that. So if you look at this and you see what's happening, let me give you an example of the Mayor's fundraising. From this first article, again, you can Google the Framingham Observer and you'll find all these articles online. The key thing is that he had a fundraiser in mid-July in which he raised $28,000. About $14,000 of that came from real estate developers and other real estate interests outside of Framingham. A further $6,000 came from people who don't live in Framingham. And so about $20,000 out of the $28,000 came from people who aren't Framingham residents. That's a complete contrast to my situation where mine are dominated by locals. And that is typical of all his prior fundraising. At the start of the year, he'd already had about $66,000 raised over 4 years. When he finished the election cycle last time when he got elected, he had nothing in his war chest then. In the intervening 4 years, he raised $66,000 and $33,000 of it was from developers. So developers have a huge influence in the city. And the first article about real estate developer money floods into Sazitsky's campaign talks about the effect of that money on development locally. However, the key thing for me is the money. Excuse me. So the money then funds these mailers, and as I've said, the mayor's sent out about 3 of these so far. And the first 2 are just about projects that he's done and the farmers market and so on. But now my campaign is focusing on education and infrastructure and environment, plus zoning and planning, as that's so important. And so the mayor sent out this mailer which says basically the facts don't lie. And on it, there are a bunch of facts that he tries to make out are really dominantly important. And he wants you to believe that the schools are in great shape. He's a big friend of the schools. And he doesn't want you to hear about the major facts which are driving the schools in a very negative direction right now. And so the thing that matters coming to the schools is what facts matter. And I'll get to the mailer here in a moment and tell you about its facts, because some of them aren't actually facts. The most important facts for me are not whether the mayor was involved in negotiations or bought the South Side School, because any mayor would have done that, because we know we have to build a South Side School, and he paid for that with $6 million of COVID money. So he didn't hurt the taxpayers at all. It was a dead simple thing to do. That's one of the facts here. The important things are that Mama's schools are in crisis. We have experienced teachers leaving the school system at about 3 times the normal rate, and I'll explain to you how that came to be. The other thing is that student performance has dropped in each one of the last 4 years, which is an unprecedented plummeting of student performance. And the last thing, as everyone well knows, the school buses have been late for 3 years, and finally the school committee intervened and took over the busing operation. The city side is responsible, or was responsible, for the school bus contract. So they take full responsibility for managing that contract and making sure it works. So here's the thing. The school buses were late. Why was that? Well, we had bus drivers who were paid $29 an hour when the market rate was $34. Now, what was Marlborough paying next door? $34, same bus company. So all the bus drivers went over and drove buses for Marlborough. They didn't have a late bus problem at all. So we did. And so even then, in talking about buses, the mayor had an opportunity a couple of years ago. NRT came to a school committee meeting and said, look, for $500,000 additional in the contract a year, we'd raise the bus driver pay to $34. Well, the mayor just ignored that. That was a really great way to have solved the problem at low cost. But instead, remarkably, a couple of months later, the mayor went and renegotiated the whole contract. Didn't do that $500,000 adjustment to solve the problem. He renegotiated the entire contract, and that ended up costing the city $1.8 million more, not the $500,000 that NRT had offered, $1.8 million more, and the bus driver pay only went from 29 to 31. The most remarkable thing about that was NRT actually offered $32.50 to drivers, but the city knocked that down to 31, even though the school committee wanted 34. So the mayor had no idea what was going on with the school committee and negotiated a very tiny increase for drivers, which consequently, at 1.3 million more than the $500,000 that NRT had offered. And so we ended up paying a lot more money and not solving the problem. That's terrible management and very bad fiscal policy for the mayor. And then remarkably, this was negotiated in something like August. And then in September, on September the 6th actually, in a city council meeting a couple of years ago, he claimed that the bus drivers were paid $34 an hour. Well, no one in the council apparently knew that that was not the case. So I pointed it out, and 6 weeks later he retracted and said, oh, I got that wrong. So it shows that he had actually no close connection to the negotiations, didn't know what was going on with the school buses, and any claim, as he has in this thing, to have helped lead the city's response to prevent a school bus strike just hours before drivers walked out is completely irrelevant. These are irrelevant, 6 irrelevant facts here, and I'll get to the others. So let me go from buses to the teacher's contract. He said, I helped negotiate a new teacher's contract without the labour unrest seen in other cities. Well, the mayor actually doesn't negotiate the teacher's contract. The school committee does. So he didn't do that at all. So then, here's another fact. He obtained funding to replace roofs on 5 school buildings that will accommodate solar panels. It kind of gives you the implication that he's all for solar. Well, he didn't do a single solar installation on any roof in the city in the 4 years that he was mayor. All of the solar roof in Fuller and at the McAuliffe Library in Knobscot were initiated and done before he became mayor. So he got the money for it, but then only 3 roofs were actually replaced because the school department didn't have enough personnel to manage 5 school roof replacements. And in the last budget, they actually cut the position that would have enabled that. So the mayor is disconnected from what is needed in replacing roofs. He's disconnected from what happens in negotiations. And he really was out to lunch completely on the school's buses. And then the final fact here is he negotiated with a school bus contractor allowing Framingham to staff buses with local employees. Well, that's not true at all. The school committee asserted that. They have control over the employees they hire. They simply went ahead and hired bus drivers. The thing they didn't have control over was getting the buses for those to drive. And they had a really good deal where they were going to lease to buy buses from Anderson Motors. And that would have been a good deal. Lincoln Lynch did a great job on that. And then comes into the council meeting because they have to approve that kind of thing. And it gets upended by George King with the mayor never intervening, and that thing went south. So then the school committee was forced to rent buses from NRT, the failed bus company. So so far all these facts are fairly meaningless except buying the Southside School. The last fact that really matters is the first one here. It says, increase school spending by about 6% every year. And that sounds really grand. That's a lot of money. Sounds pretty good, although we know inflation was 8% and 6% in a couple of those years. But what was amazing is this period of the mayor being in office saw one of the biggest injections of money from the state for students to help particularly low-income students and non-English speaking students and special needs students. It was a big boost of money. And if you look and say, well, is that 6%, taking that into account? Well, if we'd actually done this correctly, our budget would have gone up by 10%. That's what happened in comparable communities who have large non-English speaking students like Springfield. There the budget went up by about 10%. And so here I've got what would have happened if we had allowed the full force of that boost of Student Opportunity Act money to happen. We would have had in fiscal year 23 an 8% increase, and fiscal year 24 a 10% increase rather than the 6%. Now, how come it was 6%, one might ask? That big wave of state money didn't have the effect we wanted. Well, the reason is, as the state money rolled into the school system in 23 and 24, the mayor decided to cut local funding. The budget's made up out of two things. One is the state aid, which is roughly half the budget, and the other is the city-funded part, which when I left the school committee was about $90 million of taxpayer-funded money. So in 23, the first year he did a budget, he dropped that 90 million to 85. And then the next year he dropped it to 80. And then he brought it up to 87. So in 3 years, it was below the 90 million it was at when I last finished on the school committee. So I dropped it 5 plus 10 plus 3, which is $18 million. And that's why I keep on saying the mayor cut $18 million from the schools. And that's exactly what happened, and that's why we got these 6% increases instead of 10. All of that money designed to help students didn't go there. $18 million went into the city general fund. The mayor didn't spend it on anything else because he knew he was coming up for a Moody's bond rating review this year, and he knew that the city needed to look better and have better reserves. So the 18 million sat in there making the city look as though it was in a better financial position and did nothing other than that. It's an election year, you don't want the bond rating to drop. So let me get back to the schools and what's really happening, and I'll show you a graphic which is displayed here, and you can see it now. These are the city dollars supporting the school's budget, and you can see that trajectory where it's gone up 1.5% a year since 2010. Very steady and excellent support of the schools until Seliverstov got into office. The green trajectory shows where it would have gone if we had properly supported the schools as we had for the past decade. But Seliverstov dropped local taxpayer funding following that blue curve that goes down. And if you add that up, it's below that 2020 level by 2022 level by about $18 million, okay? In addition, the mayor that's below, as if you kept state at 90 to 85 to 80 to 87. But in normal circumstances, like when I was on the school committee, that taxpayer funding would have gone up about $1.25 million a year. And so that green curve goes up, you'll notice. It's not level. So the difference between these two curves, what Seliverstov funded and what it should have been, is not just the 18 million that he cut, but 1.25 increase every year for 4 years, which adds up to 12 million. So in total, the schools lost $30 million compared to when I served. So that's the key thing. And what did we lose because of that? We didn't expand pre-K to all 4-year-olds. That's the first thing. And we have a rapidly changing demographic in the city where now the school system is dominated by non-English speaking students. And they need help, and they need help particularly in pre-K. We have 300 students who are now coming into kindergarten not speaking English. The way to solve that problem is to have them all in pre-K when they're 4. They spend a year there, and then they're speaking English by the time they get into kindergarten. So the next, we'll look at a number of graphics, but that's the graphic there that summarizes where the money went away, how much went away, and the impacts of those. Pre-K wasn't expanded, so now we have kindergarten full of kids who don't speak English. It's a terrible difficulty for the teachers. Further, the aides that we have who provide special needs and particularly English language support in the classroom were paid just like the bus drivers 20% under market. So we got really poor quality aides. At one point, out of 250 aides, we had 100 vacancies in the aide population. So we ended up with very poor classroom support. So you've got those pre-K kids coming into kindergarten not speaking English. Then you have the classroom support in subsequent years falling away because we have poor quality aides because the mayor wouldn't support boosting their pay. And so you end up with, and on top of that, school buses late, disrupting classes every day. So there's 3 factors here that made the classrooms really difficult for teachers. Lack of language knowledge in kindergarten, lack of language support in the classroom in further years, and late buses. It's no wonder that teachers are leaving at 3 times the normal rate. And I want to show you a graphic. How do I know that? Well, I can do arithmetic. And what happens is, as Lincoln Lynch says, every year there's what they call turnover savings. In a normal year, we have about 1,000 teachers, and about 50 of them retire. And so they're ending up at the end of the career about $90,000. They get replaced by an incoming new teacher at 50. So each time a teacher retires, you get this 40,000 in savings, where the experienced teacher leaves at 90,000 and a new teacher comes in at 50,000. So you save $40,000. So that's turnover savings. And when I was on the school committee, in this graphic that we're now showing, in green is what the turnover savings was when I last served my last year there. And it's about 1.75 million. Well, if you divide that by 40,000, you end up with 44. So about 44 teachers left in that year. Now you can see in subsequent years, as soon as Seliverstov came into office and started cutting the school's budget, taking away this $18 million, the number of teachers leaving each year went up. This is the turnover savings that was reaped each year from that. And then there's 2025 and 2026, the last 2 bars on that histogram there. That is about $5.5 million of savings, and that corresponds to 144 teachers leaving. So we went from 44 teachers leaving to 144 teachers. So teachers are abandoning the school system right now. Experienced teachers are leaving at 3 times the rate that teachers leave in Framingham. So we've got that. Now, on to the next thing is, and this is another consequence of all this money going out of the schools, is the next graphic. If you look at student performance over the last 4 years, and some of this is, in fairness, ahead of Seliverstov, but the trend is what matters. During the Seliverstov tenure, student performance dropped, and it's keeping on dropping. Why is that? Because we have all these language issues that are not addressed with pre-K. We have poor classroom support. We have disrupted classes. So students are struggling. So, you know, as compared to this mailer, which talks about everything except student performance, except teachers leaving, and except late buses, well, it's a great mailer if you want to talk about everything that doesn't matter. So here we have 3rd grade. English language arts, and you can see in the red is students that are not meeting expectations, and the numbers 21, 22, 23 and 24 on that graphic are the years. So you can see that the number of students not meeting expectations is rising, and in 24 it was 40%, as you can see in the numbers on the left. It's 40%. So can you imagine kindergartners, you know, coming in, and then by grade 3, after all your teaching, you have kids who don't read proficiently, which is what that means in 3rd grade. Now, 3rd grade, for anyone who knows about education, is a critical point. Up to 3rd grade, teachers, you know, are teaching kids to English, how to learn English and how to read. Reading is critically important. So for the first 3 years of school, 4 years, kindergarten 1, 2, 3, you're learning how to read. And then you want to be a proficient reader. And then after that, you're reading to learn. Any kid who is not proficient in 3rd grade at reading is going to have a very difficult time. We now have, as of 24, 40% of children in 3rd grade who are not proficient readers. And that's why we're drowning as a school system. We are really at a tipping point here where teachers leaving and kids not performing. And the mayor taking that $18 million away really caused this problem. If I'm elected mayor, I'll take that $18 million, which is sitting in the city general fund, and return it to the schools over 4 years at $4.5 million a year. That will fully fund expanding pre-K to all 4-year-olds. It will fully fund raising pay for classroom aides by 20%. And it will make sure in reserve we have money there in case the buses have a problem, because NRT is an unreliable bus company, and what were they, doing as the solution for us to kind of rent buses? George King produced that problem. I don't know, but we've got money there that we can re-inject back. It was taken from the schools by the mayor, and it can be put back into the schools to try and help the teachers deal with the children who deserve a really great education. Our responsibility is to children, and this mailer doesn't talk about children and their failing performance and the teachers leaving and the late buses. So that's largely what I'm going to talk about. We've looked at the 3 graphics, and so the final bottom line here is, what does this tell you about the mayor? This tells you that the mayor is trying to tell you that everything's just great when it isn't. And so a real key issue in this election is trust. Everything I'm doing, everything I talk about here is well researched and connected back to data. You just thought 3 graphics with data on them. They're actually numbers that relate to reality. It's not just, I negotiated this, or I bought that property, or I did the fireworks, or I expanded the farmer's market. These are things that matter. And education is critical. These children's future is being destroyed at the moment for quite a large number of these kids. 100 kids in the last year never made it to school because of the buses. Never made it to school. And can you imagine, if you're living on the south side, how you get to the back home on the south side as a high school if you don't have a bus? And that's the situation. So the mayor has finally talked about education in this mailer that he sent around, but he didn't talk about anything that matters. And so you can expect more mailers like this. They'll all talk around the point. They'll probably tell you that he's good at the environment, maybe he's good at infrastructure. In subsequent episodes, I'm going to talk about infrastructure and why the sewer system still is a ticking time bomb. I'm going to talk about environmental action, of which there was none by the mayor in the last 4 years. And the charter change we're going to vote on in November produces a new position in the city government, which is the Chief Environmental Officer, Chief Climate Change Officer. The mayor wouldn't know what to do with that person. I'm an environmentalist way back. I've got solar panels on my roof at home. I've got heat pumps in my house. I've got trees planted everywhere. So on that, we're going to have a bit of a discussion. And people should know there's going to be an environmental forum put on by Access Framingham in October. So that's done it for today. This is what's ahead for us. The schools are at a tipping point, and as the mayor said on camera in one school committee meeting, he doesn't see it getting better any year. Next year, he just cut $2.5 million from the recent budget. We lost STEM coaches and all kinds of other stuff, plus the manager who would have helped do the roofs and so on. But it's really a really big problem that $18 million really damaged the schools, and the mayor doesn't want to talk about it. But I want to talk about it, and I don't like to explain all these problems. I would rather there be no problems. I'm an optimistic kind of guy. I kind of like to know when things are going well. The fact is, I am optimistic about the future, but not if Szycki gets re-elected. What has to happen here is the schools have to become a #1 priority in the city, and the community has to learn to trust the mayor. And the city council has to get the facts on everything when it's making decisions. So that's what I'm in this race for at this point. It's a mayor you can trust. It's a mayor who will listen to you. It's a mayor who will look at the problems that we have in the schools, in the DPW, in police and fire, and will talk to everyone involved and solve them. That's my pledge to you, and I'll put every effort that I can for the next 4 years into that. And it'll be a very tough job. It'll be the hardest one I've had in my life, but that's what it is. We don't want any more mailers like this coming around from the mayor, so watch for the next one. In the next episode, I'll talk about the infrastructure in the city, roads, roofs, water and sewer, and probably environment. So I look forward to you, and thanks for watching.